Okay, so I'm actually long overdue to make one of these, and been a lot of stuff going on lately. I mean, that is my usual go-to excuse when I don't do one of these for a little bit, for a little while, is I've been busy with a lot lately. But it is true, I've been busy with a lot lately. But there was a thing that popped up not too long ago in one of these online groups. I'm able to post again on social media whatever reason it was that I was banned from posting or saying anything in groups is apparently over now. But the YouTube has been deleting some of my comments I've noticed from subscribers recently. I've had to reapprove comments from people that have already posted on my channel here, and the way things are going, I've almost decided to look into alternatives for video hosting services just in case I get freaking zapped for whatever unknown reason it is. I mean, if they ban me on social media for no apparent reason, who knows what could happen next. But in a few online groups that I've participated in recently, there was a couple of big arguments about addiction and medication, as though that people who are on medication aren't really actually sober. And surprisingly enough, this wasn't coming from the AA guru types. This was coming from a few people that claimed, and I put big quotation marks on that, claimed to be against AA, but were saying you weren't really sober if you were on certain types of medication, which I found really odd because there used to be a section on the orange papers when the website was active. There is a way to get to it now. In fact, I'll post a link somewhere in the comments section for those that want to find the archived pages of it about AA sponsors telling people not to take their medications. And Actually, I was going to go into a little bit of detail about my own experiences with medications because I did say in my early videos that antidepressants ultimately helped me overcome my drinking problem, but are antidepressants always a good thing? Now, remember, I'm not a doctor, and I'm not giving people medical advice as though I am a doctor, and I'm not telling anybody what their mental conditions are. I can tell you that with the OCD I suffered and everything, and with other particular types of mental illnesses, there are links on the internet that shows the brain activity of people under CAT scans with certain with certain mental illnesses, or I guess would be the correct term for that. Now, of course, strangely enough, when I had posted this in this particular online discussion where it really went to shit, the person said, well, the people's brains are that way because addiction makes them that way. Well, that's kind of a huge leap and a huge assertion to make, and it has no basis in fact whatsoever. There's a lot of people who suffer with mental illnesses or mental problems that have never been addicts. So to say addiction turns people's brains like they reminded me of something a freaking AA old timer would say. They always have a quick excuse or a quick rebuttal for something that has no basis in fact whatsoever to shut down any kind of arguments. But I do remember in AA a particular old timer that used to, and I used to really cringe when I would hear it, even before I ever had any experiences with medications, who would say that he was paranoid schizophrenic, that he had delusions that people were following him around, that he thought that his phone lines were tapped, and he thought the government was out to get him and all this other kind of stuff, and that when he started working the steps, he realized he didn't need any kind of mental help whatsoever, that all he needed was God and the 12 steps, and that he flushed all his psychiatric medication down the toilet. And he told his psychiatrist that he had a new employer. That employer was God. And of course, every time he would share this phony bullshit story, everybody would just ooh and ah over the whole entire thing. But I actually thought that saying things like that and then having, of course, you know how AA meetings go. One old timer shares a bullshit story, and then the next 2, 3 old timers have to back it up, or they have to kind of endorse the message. It's kind of like if you're in an AA meeting and you don't say the right thing and you don't follow the right script. The few people that talk right behind you, they all have to attack what you said in an indirect way. But they would all kind of, subtly go along with how, taking medications was bad, or usually one standard lie I got I used to get repeated a lot would be people that would say things like, I spent thousands of dollars on psychiatric experts only to find out that all I needed was God and the steps. It was really funny how all these people had the same exact story or would use that same exact line over and over again. Couple of things here. If you are on any kind of medication and you want to get off of it, you can't do like this guy was saying, just go flush your medication down the toilet and get God. There's actually real both physical and mental things that can happen to a person or an individual who's been prescribed medication for any long period of time. That if you just go flush your medication down the toilet and say you've got God, your body will disagree with you completely. It would be like trying to say you're going to live without drinking any water or live without eating any food because all you need is God. Well, your intestines will tell you right quickly that's not so. My own experience with medication, and I'm in the process of actually trying to get off of it, not because of because of some bad side effects, not anything major, but I'll go into that in this particular video. I may even turn this into a two-parter if I don't get to cover everything. But around the time I left AA, I had a period of insomnia, and it was a real strange period of insomnia. I've never had anything like this before or since, but I wasn't drinking at the time, but I just was no longer sleeping. Now, before in the past, whenever I quit drinking, I would go through sleepless nights here and there. I'd have nights where it was just kind of hard to fall asleep. But this was unlike anything I'd ever gone through before. I just could not sleep. I would lay awake at night and I would watch the clock go from 2 a.m. to 3 a.m. to 4 a.m. to 5 a.m. and to 6 a.m. and finally I'd give up. I don't know how I worked during that time. I mean, I was barely functioning. I was one step away from being homeless anyway, and I was doing odds and ends work at that time. It was really a bad time in my life. But I don't know how many days this went on. I know I read all I could read about on insomnia online while this was happening, and I read somewhere that the world record on insomnia was like 12 days, 11 days, something like that. I don't know if I made that record, beat that record. I mean, it would be impossible for me to tell you how long that went on because there's no real time when you're in a hell. And this was a hell. It was a hell of being exhausted all the time. And when nighttime would roll around, I would lay down, and I would literally feel myself almost dozing off, and I would literally feel the sleepiness just go away, and I would just lay there all night long. It finally started affecting me mentally. I mean, my anxiety was already really bad anyway throughout my life. I've been having anxiety issues and OCD issues since I was a teenager. Or maybe even before then, I don't know for sure. But my own mental state, I mean, I don't know if anybody's ever been for any long periods of time without sleep, but my mental state was just a mess. I mean, I was in a state of just really, really high anxiety. And my mental state wasn't too good either. I was actually having all kinds of weird delusional thoughts and everything else, but out of desperation, I had gone to a medical doctor. I didn't know what that was going to happen. You know, when I went in there, I said, I cannot sleep. There's no way I can sleep. I've tried everything, and I just will not fall asleep. I had bought Tylenol PM. I had bought Advil PM. I had bought Benadryl, and none of it was doing any good whatsoever. At the time, they first prescribed me Ambien. I only took that like 2 nights, and I was literally having audio hallucinations, and I wasn't sleeping on it. So when I had gone back to the doctor at that time, they ended up, I remember I spoke to a counselor, and I remember I spoke to a medical doctor. It was a place that took people without insurance. It was one of those sliding scale kind of places. I'm still using that actually because my insurance, I don't have any work-related insurance at the moment. But they ended up prescribing me antidepressants. They gave me Zoloft and they gave me Trazodone. Now, the Trazodone put me unconscious the very first night I had taken it. Now, part of that was probably because I had been so long without sleep, and another part of it probably was the medication itself. And I noticed that my anxiety went away, and I noticed that I was having the ability to live without a drink was a lot easier during this time, but I had left AA, so I was no longer in AA meetings when I got on the antidepressants, and I did have some therapy that was available to me through this place that was CBT-based therapy. But in the very beginning, I was on 100 milligrams of Zoloft, and that was the generic form. It was sertraline, and I was on 200 milligrams of Trazodone. And I don't know exactly, I know I started taking it around, it would have probably been mid-2014 because I left AA for good around February of 2014. So it would have been somewhere around that time period that I started taking it. I didn't notice anything bad at first with it. And by the way, I do want to say that I did look this up online as far as side effects are concerned, or as far as things that can happen to people who take these medications are concerned. It doesn't happen to everybody. So, if you've been prescribed trazodone for your insomnia, if you've been prescribed sertraline or Zoloft for whatever reason, don't immediately start freaking out and thinking this is going to happen to you, because it might not. But pretty much all of my adult life, and I pretty much had worn the same size clothes that I wore when I was a teenager. I was usually around 160 to 155 most of my adult life. It's pretty obvious looking at me now that I'm not. Like that one troll fellow I was talking about in my last video that was always calling me a fat slob. And I say it like that because I'm just picturing that's the way he would say it, because he types like a fucking moron. But somewhere along the way, I did notice an increase in appetite. Now, correlation doesn't necessarily imply causation, because I was no longer drinking alcohol. So, that could have led to an increase in appetite. And I did notice that when my appetite would increase, I would head for the junk, like candy. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. and I just feel this unspeakable, insatiable urge to eat candy. I didn't pay attention to it at first too much. I remember when I stepped on a scale and I was like 176, I wasn't too worried about it at that time, which is something I think was a byproduct of the medication. I'll go into more detail with that later. But I wasn't too worried about it back then because, my anxiety was indeed gone. I was sleeping soundly every night, etc. And we'll flash forward a couple of years, and I realized somewhere along the way when I had stepped on a scale and I was 187, I was like, holy shit, this just kind of snuck up on me. But literally, when I would take my Zoloft the night before bed, about an hour or 2 hours later, I would just get an insatiable appetite. It's funny, when I would read about people and taking Zoloft, taking trazodone and having weight gain online, I would hear this talk from people about, well, just don't eat, just don't do this. It's kind of like telling people who are hopelessly addicted to booze, just don't drink. This isn't like the feeling of, well, I really wished I could have another donut, but I probably shouldn't. It wasn't like that at all. It was like this feeling of I'm starving to fucking death was what it felt like. When I kind of reached a point where I knew I was going to have to do something about that was when I stepped on a scale one day and I was like 196, and I'd never been even close to anything like that in my entire life. Plus, I was having effects in other areas of my life in personal ways, and I hadn't made the actual correlation between the medications until I started researching the medications quite by accident. And I thought, well, there could be something to this, because I'd never had a problem with eating, and I'd never had a problem with appetite in my entire life. Even when I was a kid, I was one of those kids that was littler than everybody, and I had to endure a lot from the bullies and everything. That's probably why I had developed such a smart-ass mouth, because I was one of those little kids that would just, I'd mouth off to the biggest and the best of them, and then, if I had to, I could run. I was a real fast runner back then, but I'd never had a problem with my appetite. And, I was brushing it off for the longest because I said, well, I'm no longer drinking and I'm no longer doing those kinds of things. It's probably something that happens to everybody when they quit, kind of like people when they quit smoking seem to have a weight gain. Not everybody, but some people do. But I knew I was going to have to do something different because, I knew I was headed in a direction I didn't want to go with this. So I started trying to do all this dieting and all this other kind of stuff. And I remember I had starved myself practically to death for a couple of weeks, and I had stepped on the scale and I had gone up a couple of pounds. And I remember I've said it before on here that I did like the doctor I had. And I had always liked him, but I immediately encountered an issue that sounded too much like AA shit, and it was an issue that kind of sent me a warning bell that said, you may need to start looking for a second opinion on this. Is I had gone to the doctor and I said, look, I've been reading about these antidepressants, and to be honest, my life circumstances have completely and utterly done a 180-degree change since I was first prescribed these things. Since I was first prescribed these medications, my life has completely changed. My circumstances have changed. The way everything is going in my life has changed. I've completely changed, and I'm not so sure I need to be on these any longer. Plus, I kind of think they're causing me to gain all this weight. And I didn't like the answer I got because he immediately copped an attitude with me, and he immediately had this. Well, the first thing he said is, "Would you rather be content in your mental state and fat, or would you rather be a neurotic drunk and skinny?" And I thought, well, now wait a minute. It's not. That's a bit of a false dichotomy type thing. It doesn't have to be one or the other here. It sounded too much like something somebody in AA would have said to me. Plus, the next thing he said is, if you don't want to listen to me, then why are you coming here? I thought, that sounds again like AA people that, these AA sponsors that tell you if you're not going to do exactly what I tell you all the time, and all that kind of bullshit. So I decided it was time to look for a second opinion. I did get a second opinion with somebody. And that hasn't been that long ago. But they had said, if you believe that you need to come off these medications, maybe we should start lowering your doses and see what happens. If it gets too bad, you can always go back to taking what you're taking. So I went from taking 100 milligrams of sertraline a day to 50 milligrams of sertraline a day. And I went from taking 200 milligrams of Zoloft at night to 150 milligrams of Zoloft at night. And I did notice a difference. I did notice my appetite was curbing. I noticed that I went from like 197 to 187 like pretty fast. I mean, I'm at 182 as of this morning. I still am not where I want to be. I want to be all the way back down into the 170s and the 160s again. But I noticed the difference mentally as well with the Zoloft. I'm now down to 25 milligrams of Zoloft every other day. When I got down to 25 milligrams of Zoloft every day, down to 25 milligrams of Zoloft and down to 100 milligrams of Trazodone every day, I began to notice a difference, not in the way I thought it was going to be. At first, there was a bit of anxiousness, there was a bit of nervousness, there was a bit of anxiety here and there, but it wasn't nothing that was major. It wasn't nothing really any different than any anxiety I was coping with at the current time before I started lowering my medication dosages. But I did notice that I was starting to get some energy back that I hadn't had in a long, long time. I was feeling a little bit more mentally alert. I was feeling a little bit more aware. I was feeling a little bit more energetic. It was easier for me to do things. I mean, when I was on 100 milligrams of Zoloft and 200 milligrams of Trazodone, it was like a struggle to motivate myself to do anything outside of going to work and everything. It was literally a fight in order to do anything different. I noticed that it wasn't hard for me to start working out again, and I noticed it wasn't hard for me to start doing other things again, and I noticed certain things, did start to get better mentally with me. I was a little bit worried about it because I had tried to get off Zoloft before and had one of those famous things they call brain zaps. You can read about them online. You can have a brain zap, and it's not a pleasant sensation when it happens. But this time around, and I don't know if it's because of my circumstances, and I don't know if it's because things in my life have improved, but I'm finding that, so far I've made, in my opinion, a wise choice to start scaling back on these medications and slowly get off of them. That's not my endorsement to say nobody needs to be on medication, because I definitely needed to be on something at the time that I was prescribed those things. I just don't think that I no longer, the circumstances that was going on in my life at that time are completely not there any longer. Those issues don't exist any longer. So I kind of feel it's time for me to try to see what will happen if I try to gradually, slowly, but surely go completely off of them. I'm not going to say that I'm going to be 100% antidepressant free within a few months or within a few weeks or anything like that, but I've noticed that like on 25 milligrams of Zoloft every other day, I'm not doing too badly. I'm not having any anxiousness. I'm not having any sleepless nights. I'm not having any real adverse side effects, with it. And this is done under doctor's supervision, so I'm going to try to do it every 2 days in the coming week or two. As far as the appetite problem, yeah, it's kind of gone away. But I also think the medication actually screwed with my metabolism, to be honest, because I used to be one of those irritating people that could just eat and eat and eat and not have any weight problems whatsoever. Now, of course, older age probably plays a role in that, because I'm 43 years old now. I'll be 44 in November. But as far as medications are concerned, they served the purpose for me once. I don't think they serve that purpose for me any longer. That's not to say that people with real issues like schizophrenia or people with OCD or people with other types of mental issues don't need to be on their medications. And it irritates me and it pisses me off that people would actually make judgments about people on medications and their sobriety, because mental illness has nothing to do with addiction necessarily, nor does people with addictions have anything to do with mental illness. Is it not mentally sound to drink a half gallon of vodka a day like I used to do? That might be true, but it's not necessarily an underlying issue of a mental problem. I mean, some people drink too much or do drugs too much because they simply just love to do those things. I don't recall drinking to stop a mental problem too much. I remember when I first started drinking, it did help my OCD. It did help shut the voices up in my head. But to be honest, later on in life, I drank for pleasure. I mean, I didn't drink because I had voices to drown. Like when I was 25 and I was having a lot of fun drinking, I wasn't trying to drown out voices in my head. I wasn't trying to stop a mental illness. I was just enjoying drinking, and drinking wasn't a problem for me back in those days. I don't know if I actually got a chance to cover all the bad experiences I've seen happen to people in AA that would drop off their medication as a result of their so-called sobriety, but I have had those cases. I have seen that personally. I knew a guy in AA that was actually one of the nicer ones. There's very few and far between with that, but he was he was an easy individual to get along with. He was funny as well, and every time he would drop off his psych meds, it would be only a matter of weeks before he would be a completely different person, and he would be completely out of touch with reality. And I watched him go from a guy that was living on his own, that was doing real well as a pipe fitter, and had a career and everything, and he would drop off his medications in the name of sobriety, and he'd be living on the streets within, a record-breaking period of time. And once that happened to him that one time, the couple of years I knew him, he never was able to get back on track again. Even, I don't think he ever got back on his psych meds again, but he would get back on them for something that would be prescribed to him by doctors for a little while, and then within a couple of months, he'd be right back in the same position he started with. I knew people that ended up in mental institutions that would try to drop off their medications cold turkey simply because they didn't think it fit the definition of sobriety. I knew people in AA that would end up, well, I've known of people who had severe depressive problems that ended up committing suicide, and I can't really say it's because they dropped off their medications, but I could say that they were actually functioning ordinary people when they were on their medications, when they would just go off their medications because their sponsors would tell them to, or because they just had this feeling that wasn't real sobriety. The term real sobriety actually pisses me off anyway, because you got these people in AA, and I'm a smoker, I will admit that, and I drink coffee, but they would be standing outside a meeting with a cigarette in their hand, on their third pack of cigarettes, with their 18th cup of coffee in their hand, talking about, I don't need any chemical or substance to change the way I feel today. I'm like, so then why don't you throw away the coffee, and why don't you throw away the cigarettes if you don't need anything to alter the way you feel today? But as far as medications are concerned, in my personal experience, there was a time they served me, there's a time they no longer serve me, and I think it's time for me to get off of them. But you certainly don't go flush your medications down the toilet in the hope that you're going to just, be able to just walk away from them freely like that. You can't, I've been on them since 2014. You can't just flush 6 years down the drain and say, okay, I don't need that anymore, and not expect real physical and real mental repercussions. But there are some people out there who I believe do need to be on their medications, and I believe there are some people out there who have to have their medications, and I don't believe that any fucking body has any right to tell that person that they're not really sober, or they're not really functional, or they're not really being this attitude that I've seen online, this just pull yourself up by your bootstraps and be a man, that doesn't really work. And as a matter of fact, I've seen I grew up in a world like that. I grew up in a time period where it was just be a man, just pull yourself up and be a man. Don't whine, don't complain, be tough, be strong. And I've seen a lot of people end up being severe drunks and severe drug addicts and all kinds of other things as a result of a society like that. Obviously, if that worked so well, we would have never, as a collective whole, rejected that type of mentality. It kind of irritates me when I see people saying, well, these people are just babies that want to be dependent on their medications. You don't have no fucking clue as to the truth of that or not. As far as this idea that we were better off when everybody just stuffed their issues and nobody talked about what really bothered them and nobody took any medications. There's no actual real proof of that. I know that it never made my life any better trying to just suck it up or face life on life's terms, as the old-timer quacks used to say it. But anyway, I may expand more on this topic later because I mainly in this video just talked about my own issues with it. But for now, I mainly was just wanting to actually do a video because I haven't done one soon enough. So hopefully now that I've kind of got my schedule and everything hammered out, I can make more of these. And I don't know if I'll expand on this one further or what my next video will be about. We'll just have to play it by ear and see how it goes. Until next time.